Hi everyone, I'm Mike Abadi. Welcome back to VTblogosphereTV. We are up to episode number 32, and we are very happy to welcome Charity Tensel here today. Thanks for getting over from Burlington.
Yes.
And you live there with your family, 3 kids?
Yes, 3 kids, 3 sons.
And you have at least 3 blogs if we count them. Should I go down the, She's Right, you was your original blog. You gained a lot of notice for in, I guess the mid-2000s. Is that, when did you start that?
February of 2006, I believe, is when I started She's Right.
Okay. And then that blog has since retired, but it's still up. It's kind of archived.
Yes.
And you have a blog, Shatter Nicely, about religion and atheism. And Tenselblog, which continues the tradition of blogging about politics. And there was also another religious blog that it was All Things Hold Together. That was kind of a short-term transitional blog, or is it still up?
That was, well, it's still up. I've never deleted anything I've put up on the internet, so it's still there. That was more of a personal religious blog when I was religious. And I talked about my life, basically, crafting, cooking, homeschooling children, and my own faith.
Okay. And did that morph into Shatter Nicely, or they ran parallel? Or?
No, they actually, I kept All Things Hold Together going for a while, just as a craft blog, after I had started doing Shatter Nicely. So that was kind of it ran parallel between partly when I was doing She's Right, partly when I did Shatter Nicely as my personal blog, and I've kind of abandoned doing a personal blog. So
in the Vermont blogosphere, you are a constellation unto yourself. That's a great list of places to go.
I think it's neat. You can do so much with a blog. You know, I had a cooking blog, I had a craft blog, you know, I had a political blog, I have a blog about religion and atheism. It's just, there's so much you can do that I just kind of had my hand in everything for a while.
She's Right, you started, you said in 06?
I think it was February of 06.
Okay. So that was Bush's second term. It's a pretty different country. The Democrats had yet to take the Senate back. Why did you start it?
Well, I had a public access show in Burlington, or a government access show in Burlington on Channel 17, which was called She's Right. And I started that, I want to say, in the fall of 05. And then, actually, I saw Hike Bedrosian's blog, burlingtonpaul.com, and I started reading his blog and commenting, and I thought, hey, this looks like fun. I should start a blog. And it's funny because the first post on She's Right, I just jumped in like I had always been blogging. And what happened was She's Right, the show, was preempted by local election coverage. And so it must have been February.
Okay.
And I decided to write a post about what I, probably would have talked about on the show. I just jumped right in and went from there. And then at the time, Kathy Resmer from 7 Days had a site called 802 Online, where she featured different Vermont blogs. And I was featured on there a few times, or links to She's Right. And then I just kind of became part of the early Vermont political blogosphere.
Okay. That's sort of the premise of this show, is that a lot of the brilliance, and I will use that word, that's out there in the blogosphere can transfer to other media. So why not get that on television, where people are often just getting sort of a corporate or traditionalist news? But you came from the other way, so there's definitely a relationship. I guess, what do you see the relationship between access TV and blogging? Well,
I think they're both two sides of the same coin, which would be democratization of media and information.
Nice.
And I got that term from Bill Simmons, who was a guest on She's Right once. And
here.
And he obviously knows a lot about that topic. But it's really great for just regular people to be able to express their views on topics that were always reserved for the elite.
The experts,
the experts, the people with journalism degrees, the people who were inside Washington were the only people who could talk about politics. And now you have all these average people whose opinions are as respected as some of these professional journalists. So and you're getting a totally different perspective.
Right, right. So I guess the experts or the traditionalists would push back and say, but look at, I guess the tone and tenor of the blogosphere is often argued that people just go to where people agree with them. Like I'm gonna go to left-wing blogs and read about people who agree with me and have my facts selected for me that agree with my worldview. And it's not like those days when everyone read, you know, the Burlington Free Press and everyone watched the Channel 3 news, and that was sort of everyone's pool of knowledge was the same, and then they kind of bounced off their opinions from here. But now you can really just tailor your information for your ideology. But you didn't do that. I mean, when you were writing She's Right, you were visiting progressive blogs and engaging that world. And I think that's pretty rare. Or maybe the blogosphere is roomy. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think it depends. I see a lot of, when I did start reading conservative blogs, which are more on a national level, there isn't really a big conservative blogosphere in Vermont. But I noticed a lot of just, you could tell people echoing each other's opinions, reading each other's blogs, and not stepping outside of that. And I don't feel like that benefits anybody. It doesn't benefit us as individuals to narrow where we're getting our information from to only people who agree with us. And it doesn't benefit us as a democracy to have people only getting their information from people who agree with them. And I think you do see that a lot. A lot of people do choose to go that route, and I think it's unfortunate because it kind of diminishes, you know, the richness of the debate and the conversation. Right. I mean, I learned a lot from reading other people's blogs, and I often disagreed with people, and people would come to She's Right and they would often disagree with me, but I feel like it's important to at least see where the other person is coming from, you know, and at the very least, it helps you reinforce your own views if you defend them against someone who is the polar opposite, especially, you know, and if you're forced to defend your views and you can do so successfully, then, you know, that's really a good feeling to feel, you know, to know that you're not just blindly parroting what you're hearing from other people, you know, but you've really thought about your views and you've defended them. Right,
right. I'm thinking of J.D. Ryan of Five Before Chaos fame, who used to visit She's Right fairly regularly, and I'm not, the word taunt that comes to mind, but that's probably not accurate. I think he was engaging you as a progressive blogger and challenging you. Yeah,
definitely.
And I'm just wondering how what kind of influence his visits had on you?
You know, it's interesting because at the time I would have said none. There were times when those kind of, it was like the same debate over and over. You know, at the time on She's Right, I was very small government conservative, which is a kind of a subset of libertarianism. And obviously, at that time, I was very conservative religiously. I was a conservative Christian. And so I didn't talk about religion often, but I did sometimes. And then I talked about politics mostly from a conservative libertarian perspective. And it always seemed like JD and I were rehashing the same arguments and not really getting anywhere. And it was almost as if there was no point to it. But once I did start to change my ideology, especially my religious ideology, it's like those arguments kind of came back up in my mind. So I think it is important to engage people who you completely disagree with, because even if they don't agree with you at the time, at least those ideas are there. At least they've heard them. They've heard them articulated well, hopefully.
Right,
and it's kind of had a chance to, you know, take root in the back of their mind, and maybe sometime in the future, if they're open to it, they might say, oh, wait a minute, you know, that is right, or that does make sense, or whatever. So I just think it's really important, having experienced myself the impact it had on me, to have people disagree with me, and how that did change my mind eventually. and not necessarily on its own, but more through like my own personal transformation. Those ideas were still in the back of my head, and so I think it's important to engage people that you disagree with. And I sometimes have people hesitate in the comments of my blogs to disagree with me, and I always think, you know, I want to be disagreed with.
Yeah, finish your thought, right.
You know, I want to be challenged, because I don't think I have all the answers, which is a big reason why I stopped blogging at She's Right, because even though that was meant to mean right as in conservative, I wasn't feeling very conservative anymore, but also I wasn't feeling like I was right in the sense of correct, and I don't feel like I have all the answers anymore. I don't feel as staunchly ideological as I used to be,
So that shift happened. There's an element of sort of dialogue in the blogosphere that helped that shift happen. Were there other things like, I don't know, they speak of like the Katrina moment where like sort of Bush lost the country, or were there events that were happening in the state or the country or otherwise in your life that made that shift happen? I guess, was it gradual or like a one day? Hold on a sec.
Well, you're talking about the political shift?
Because initially, right. Or maybe one drove the other and I don't have the order right.
Well, it was originally when I left Christianity, I stopped believing in God, essentially. I called myself an agnostic when I first posted about it on She's Right. And, you know, I was still conservative. I even said, this doesn't mean I'm going to become a liberal. I don't feel like the two are connected in the sense that I was conservative politically before I became a Christian. I became a Christian as an adult, and I was already politically conservative. So I feel like they aren't necessarily connected. What happened for me was I was very deeply and devoutly religious for about 5 or 6 years. And waking up one day and realizing that everything I believed so strongly I no longer believed made me question everything I believe about anything. From the parenting, nutrition, marriage, the environment, politics, you name it, like every area of my life I felt like I needed to re-examine, because I didn't feel like I should just default to what I always thought was true. And when I started examining things is when I started changing my mind on certain things politically.
Right. Yeah, they really aren't like a sort of list of categories. It's sort of a web of belief. And if something here shifts, then what happens to an issue that's seemingly unrelated?
Yeah, it was more like just the implication of, if I could be wrong about something as big as God, then what else am I wrong about? You know, that's really what happened for me, was I need to stop and reevaluate pretty much everything. So,
at that point, you decide to retire She's Right, or that was a slow waning of that blog, or how did that wind down?
I basically decided that the name wasn't reflective of where I was at ideologically anymore. And I didn't want to be known as that, because that carried with it a lot of baggage. People coming into the blog assuming, oh, she's a conservative, so she believes A, B, C, D. And that was, you know, not even me personally, or things I had said in the past, but just, you know, if someone came onto that blog who had never heard of me, but found out that, oh, she's right, okay, so she believes all these conservative things, which
kind of a pigeonholing,
yeah, and that always bothered me anyway, because I feel like I didn't follow lockstep with every single conservative belief out there. And actually, that's part of the reason why I didn't like reading a lot of conservative blogs, because I didn't agree with everything that was being said, and I didn't want to fall into that category, really. But I decided I didn't want to do She's Right anymore, and I started this other blog, Shatter Nicely, which was actually in the works already. And it was going to be a blog about where I was going to take a look at the different beliefs and things that were being said in politics, in our culture, and kind of dissect them from a logic standpoint. And because I think we have a lot of illogical arguments floating around that are generally accepted, and they don't follow, and I mean the discipline of logic, you know, they don't follow logic, you know, one thing doesn't logically follow from the other. And Shatter Nicely was a a name I found. I was doing an online anagram generator of my name, and Shatter Nicely is an anagram of Charity Tensel.
Yeah, that's a great name.
So I thought, oh, Shatter Nicely, that's perfect for this logic blog that I'd been mulling around this idea. And so I registered the domain name, and I was kind of in the process of getting that up and running at the same time that I stopped believing in God, and She's Right started to kind of taper off. And so I just kind of made the shift over to Shatter Nicely. Around the same time I stopped doing She's Right. And but because I was going through this big religious shift personally, I decided to kind of go through and explore some of those topics, things that were coming up for me. Because it's a huge life-changing experience to stop believing in God. Mm-hmm. Especially when I was, I was one of those evangelical Christians that you see on TV that is praying at the dinner table, is reading the Bible, is just kind of living it in their day-to-day life, not just going to church on Sundays. So really the foundation of my whole entire life had just completely crumbled, and there was a lot to work out. Right. And so I started blogging about that on Shatter Nicely. And I stopped politics. I stopped blogging about politics completely for almost a whole year. And then I decided that I didn't want to talk about politics on Shatter Nicely, because that blog had been going for a year, and it had been about very personal experiences with my religious transformation, and I didn't want to bring politics into that site. Mm-hmm. So that's when I decided to start a new political blog. Mm-hmm.
Now, Shatter Nicely had visitors who were maybe not necessarily in this same place where you were. Would you find religious conservatives visiting, or was it more people who were also in that place of questioning, or the traffic was pretty diverse? Or
for the most part, it was almost entirely people who were going through their own religious transition. And it's a very lonely feeling. Christianity is a very social religion, and you really have this network of friends through, in church, people who go to the same church or whatever. You have this community that's very strong and supportive of each other, and to leave that it's really scary and it's really lonely. Mm-hmm. And I would get a lot of people coming to the blog who were going through the same thing. And the interesting thing about that blog is I don't get a lot of comments on it, but I get email from people. And
it's not so public, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, it does make sense. It's just a very personal topic, and I've had people confide a lot of personal things in me because they, because I'm confiding it in them. I'm not really confiding. I'm posting it publicly on the internet.
But you're willing to put
opening
it out
up,
there. Yeah,
right? Exactly, and people appreciate that, but they're not necessarily willing to do it themselves. And I honestly can't blame them. It's kind of it's scary,
mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do that. But I think it's great because in the beginning, when I first left Christianity, I found a community on the internet. There are a couple of websites that really cater to ex-Christians and have like discussion boards and blogs.
Do you mind mentioning them?
There's one site called, I think it's ex-Christianity, like EX Christianity. I want to say it's .net, I'm not sure. And then there's Deconversion, which I think is .com. And those communities were very helpful. I wasn't a huge participant, but I read a lot of things.
Right.
And it's just a similar experience for anybody who's going through it. You go through a lot of the same emotions, regardless of what denomination you were or where you are in your deconversion process. It's nice to know that there are other people going through it. Mm-hmm. And that's really what drove me to continue doing Shatter Nicely and keep opening up about that stuff. Was just that knowing that other people appreciated it and would take the time to send me a message and let me know that.
You describe really eloquently the sort of sense of loss in leaving Christianity. What I guess what did you gain? What was the plus of that?
Well, for one thing, I don't need to reconcile things that I just don't hold true. I was. When compared to reality. I was a Bible is the truth kind of Christian, and there's a lot in the Bible that is very hard to reconcile with, with what we see in the world. And I always struggled with the conservative Christianity's stance on gay marriage and homosexuality in general.
Right, the libertarian. conflict with conservative Christianity. Yeah,
definitely politically, I had that conflict, but even morally, because it didn't fit with people I know, and who are good people, nice people, good parents, and yet we have this this religion that I believe in so strongly, telling me that these are people who are going to go to hell, for lack of a better way to put it. And I just, they're doing something wrong, something that's just fundamentally wrong, and I couldn't really believe that, and I always struggled with that, but at the time I felt like I needed what I was getting from the religion, and so I would just kind of try to ignore those things, but not having to defend things that I don't even really fully believe is a huge relief. And yeah, they would just, it's oppressive to have everything that you're supposed to think about, everything dictated to you. And it's very freeing to not have that anymore. It's scary because I had to figure out things on my own.
Right.
And that's been a huge process. That's still really going on. It's been a year and a half, and there's still some things I find myself trying to figure out. But it's also freeing, and it's a relief. There isn't that guilt and that frustration of being confined to these ideals that were set up. I mean, let's face it, a completely different culture that couldn't even conceive of where we are today. And also a very oppressive to women, a very kind of culture. So that's hard to try to reconcile, with my own ambitions and I don't have a very submissive nature, so that was always hard for me to kind of work through.
Yeah, you're making me. I mean, this sort of, I guess, polling data shows women tend to be more liberal. There probably are not many conservative women bloggers, even nationally. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if you know of any. Or?
I know of several that I happen to kind of get into. Maybe it's a secret club. I did happen to find a small pocket of conservative women bloggers. I mean, obviously there's the big names like Michelle Malkin, but there are some smaller bloggers, and I found myself disagreeing with them more even than I disagreed with the conservative men, because what they were trying to convince themselves in order to continue to toe the line on all these conservative beliefs was it was kind of antithetical to how I feel about myself as a woman. It's very anti-feminist, and I've never been like a really big, feminist proponent, but at the same time, I have my own ambitions and my own unwillingness to be oppressed.
Right. And maybe conservatism was sort of an assertion of like embracing something that often is considered like, oh, that's the male side of the political spectrum, and the Democrats win the women, and that's why they win elections. But now Tenselblog is your, will we say, final blog, or you do have something in the works right now, don't you?
Yeah, I do have. Well, I registered the domain charitytensel.com probably years ago, just to have, and I was doing my crafting and cooking posts there, which I have stopped doing, and I'm in the process of revamping that site, just to reflect where I'm going career-wise in my life.
Great.
So that's just kind of on hold. But Tenselblog is the new political blog.
Yeah, and you've got some great recent stuff up there, particularly about nuclear power, and finding, I guess you still maintain connection on Twitter with conservative friends, and hearing their take on Fukushima, and you want to share some of the recent thoughts you've had on nuclear power through the blogosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, since I was young, been opposed to nuclear power. In fact, I didn't even know we had a nuclear power plant in Vermont for years. I grew up in Vermont. And
it's way down there.
And well, I was from Rutland, so
oh, yeah.
I was closer.
You were south, yeah.
But but it's just, I was appalled because it doesn't, to me, it does not fit with what Vermont means to me as a state. I mean, it's green and has lots of trees, and it's very natural and rural, and the kind of environmental devastation that results from an accident at a nuclear power plant is just, to me, it seemed like something Vermont would not want to take a chance with.
Huge risk to the tourist economy and everything, right?
Just, I mean, the state would never recover, at least that area, at a minimum. But there were a lot of conservatives on Twitter especially who were downplaying what happened in Japan and saying, oh, well, it's not that bad, it could have been worse, you know, luckily they stopped it and the radiation isn't that bad. Meanwhile, you know, they're continuously expanding the number of people who need to evacuate and it's still leaking radiation into the environment, and you know, people are just turning a blind eye to the environmental devastation that's going on there. And I just, I actually, that post you're referring to, I lost a Twitter follower because I referenced Fukushima and said we need to close Vermont Yankee. You know, I mean, why we would want to take a risk at all, no matter how small, and arguably it's not as small of a risk as people want to make it out as, but why would we want to take that kind of risk? I mean, it just, the fallout, excuse the pun, but
literal and
of to the environment and to human health, and just, I mean, it's just so, I don't even think we can comprehend, you know, how devastating it would be, and I just don't know why people would want to take that kind of risk. And I feel like I'm repeating myself.
Right. Well, it's a point well made. It is interesting how Facebook and Twitter, and I've noticed this, is where there will be this kind of overlap. They aren't just a left world or a right world. And you were running into people whose kind of, their beliefs weren't really matching up reality as you saw it. And were you directly addressing people, or did you just kind of put it out there on your?
I'm not much of a Twitter user. I used it a lot when I organized 2 tweet-ups for Philip Ruth's state Senate campaign.
You're here.
And after that, I kind of stopped using Twitter. I find it hard for me personally to really get into it. Maybe if I had a smartphone, but I just occasionally I'll throw something out there, but I mostly use it almost like a news reader. And I just go. I have certain people who I follow. Just to kind of get a perspective from different areas. I have like only a couple conservatives I still follow, just to keep my, you know, just to keep my toe over on that side, just to see how the waters are over there. But increasingly, I found myself disagreeing more and more, and agreeing more with people who I previously considered almost radically left. So it's kind of funny because it's not just me, also my husband has been kind of shifting his ideology. He's not a blogger, but he's quite conservative. And if I had a nickel for every time I hear, not to sound like a liberal,
but
and I actually just last night he said it again, I started laughing. I said, well, what's wrong with sounding like a liberal? And he's like, don't get me started, because you know we've spent so many years feeling like that was the other side, you know, and especially when it comes to environmentalism and especially nuclear power, we both have always been out of sync with the conservative movement on those issues. And even if you go back and look, and she's right, I've always been, that's always been a problem I've had with the conservative side, is their lack of regard for the environment.
Right. Well, I'm getting the word we got to move, but yeah, it's a complicated world, and it's definitely labels don't do this world justice. So it's very wise to be visiting all over the blogosphere. I'm guilty of getting in my little rut of the 5 little sites I visit, and it's always good to discover something new and say, oh yeah, that is a way of looking at things that I need to take into consideration. So much appreciated on the time, Charity. Visit the blogs; they're great reading, and she's a regular. She does write regularly. It's good stuff.
Not as frequently as I would like, but
well,
I try to be regular.
I mean, you keep at least a couple up and running and current nicely. Shatter Nicely. All right. So good night, everyone. VTblogosphereTV is signed off.
abolitionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.